The mathematical function RAND, which generates a random number between 0 and 1, doesn't sound like the kind of function that a lot of us would be using. Certainly mathematicians, scientists, engineers would have use for this, but how about the rest of us? Well, here's a list of data here. Looks like it's sorted by Social Security number. It's about 400 records or so. Maybe from time to time we review these entries here. It's our form of quality control. We want to pull out 6 of these at random. How do we sort this list in a random order? And it could be any kind of list, of course, that you want to review from time to time. Pick the next available column to the right, equal RAND. Left parenthesis is all you need to type. All RAND does is generate a value between 0 and 1. And you don't necessarily have to adjust the display or anything. And by double-clicking in the lower right-hand corner, we see a series of random numbers. Now, depending on how this was formatted, possibly you're seeing random numbers like that. I just used general format on that, Control-Shift-tilde. But whether it's this display or the other one makes no difference. To make this slightly more appropriate, let's just give it a dummy heading, RR, something like that, anything. Notice how all the entries change. And every time you do a recalculation or make any change to a cell, these random numbers get regenerated. But if we base our sort simply on this data, and all we've got to do is make sure the active cell is within the column. If we've got an empty column to the right, any other data to the right of that gets ignored. We're going to sort this list quickly based on the random numbers as we now see them. So on the Data tab, we could click AZ or ZA, makes no difference, and we've ordered the list based on the random numbers. In the meantime, they all got changed. Now, we don't have to worry about the nature of random numbers, how they got generated, anything like that. As we look at this list, it is in no particular order. And because the random numbers got regenerated, we don't even have a paper trail of how it sorted them. But we don't care. Our purpose was simply to put this in a random order, and then maybe we'll copy this data here, maybe for the first 10 records or so, paste them somewhere out, review the contents, and that's it. We simply wanted to get a random list here based on this entire entry, so we added a temporary new column and used the RAND function. Don't need this data anymore, we'll delete it. Now, if you work with sample data, and I tend to do that a lot, you might not necessarily have that need, but here's another example. I need to generate some random numbers here, but they all need to fall within a certain range. So I could select all these cells at once. A companion function to RAND is called RAND between, equal RAND between, left parenthesis. I want all these numbers to fall between 100 and 10,000. And because I've selected all these cells at once, I'll simply press Control-Enter, and we'll have a random number in every case here, a whole number between 100 and 10,000. That's inclusive, so possibly those two numbers could turn up in our list. And there we are. The columns get readjusted. Now remember, they are dynamic, and so, for example, if I go to another cell and just type in a number or something or make a change, as soon as I press Enter, all of these numbers will change. So at some point here, if you say, well, I want them to freeze, in other words, let's not allow them to change anymore, a quick way to adjust this, and you may have seen this in an earlier movie, is highlight this data, and then with the right mouse button, simply drag this temporarily elsewhere and then right back on top of itself. So I'm going to slide this into column S and then slide it right back on top of the data. But I'm using the right mouse button here, dragging the data rightward, then leftward, letting go of the right mouse button. Copy here is values only. So we've taken those random numbers that were generated by the RAND between function and simply turned them into pure values. So that's a set of random numbers for these entries. Now, similarly, if you need to set up some random dates, I want some dates in here. I'm setting up some sample data. It might be quite a few too. I want them to all fall within this date range right here. And so you haven't necessarily formatted these just yet, but you could have certainly. But let's say we got a chunk of numbers here and here too. And by the way, this example, we could be doing this across multiple columns. It's not restricted to a single column. Equal RAND between. In this example, we want all of our results to fall between the range represented by January 1st, 2012, and also the other date. Now we want all these functions to be referring to U2, so we want that to be an absolute address. So we'll press the function key F4, comma. And the top entry, or the highest entry, will be the entry from cell U3. We'll press F4 to make that an absolute address. And we can simply press Control Enter here. And we've got a bunch of random dates that fall within this range. Now, once again, these are still active, meaning they will change if we make changes to the worksheet. So if they appear to fit your needs, now some people might say, well, gee, there's a bunch of Aprils there. Can we somehow change this? Well, you can press F9 to regenerate them all. That's one way. Or go to an empty cell, type space and enter, something like that. But as we do this now, we've got a different set. Sometimes you don't like the results of these random calculations. You want something a little different. So just press F9. If that looks reasonable to you, highlight the data. And once again, with the right mouse button, this time we'll drag it rightward and then right back on top of itself using the right mouse button. Copy here as values only. So we've generated a bunch of random dates that fall between these two dates. And we don't need to keep those there anymore. We could get rid of them if we wished. So we've seen how the RAND function and then RAND between allow us to generate random numbers, and maybe more important and more common use might be simply to use as a vehicle for sorting data to put it in random order.